Oh, sorry, it started. I'm so sorry. So this is for our week 6, journal number 3, part 3 reflections, culturally and linguistic responsive practices. I have a list of questions. We have 6 questions to pick from for this video journal. And then, so what I'll do is I have listed down the questions. I have also taken pictures of the standards for the competencies, which goes into number 6, I think, to be sure. Hopefully you guys can hear me. I am going to speak pretty loudly to make sure that you can. So now I'm going to list the questions, and hopefully I can make it within the 2 to 3 minutes, but actually it's pretty hard for me. So number 1, what came most naturally in determining the plan? More of the cultural balance, being brought up in a strict manner, but also modern as I grew older. Even though it was strict as a child, I leaned toward finding families who were a little more strict. I like to give them some ideas on how to be a little more modern in their thinking and stuff like that. For example, I took a picture of one of the competencies, so standard 4D came much more natural in developing a plan. It was standard 4D, developing and sustaining reflective, responsive, and intentional practice, where, so for example, is making judgments based on the child and socially how they are or how they are culturally. So I was much more comfortable making judgments upon stuff like that. Number 2, what was the most challenging? This is where I wanted to go actually more into the standard 4C, where it says using a broad repertoire of developmentally appropriate, culturally and linguistic relevant, and evidence-based teaching approaches that reflect universal design for learning. So, for example, standard 4C is one of the statements that were listed is representing children's culture indoor and outdoor. As much as I was comfortable making the decision or judgment, I wasn't able to actually partake in representing the child's culture by actually picking activities. So I feel like personally I needed more experience with that. Going on to number 3, what parts of the plan do you think will be the easiest? What parts of the plan do you think will be the easiest to implement and why? Because I feel like I have judgment down, like I'm much more comfortable with it. Excuse me. It'll be easier to implement activities as soon as I become comfortable with it, or when I start to work with teachers. Then I feel like it'll be much more easier, much more flowy, and I can also start to implement, for example, standard 4D, developing and sustaining the intentional practice. So I'll be much more able to become intentional in whatever practice or activity I'm going to partake in. That was number 3. Number 4, what parts of the plan do you think will be the challenge to implement and why? This is where, so the standard 4 in particular was the part that I had much more trouble with. I feel like, again, I would need much more practice with it due to my appointment of being only under a school district, a public school district. I feel like it would help me to have some more hands-on time with a preschooler and not just one-on-one. I've had a lot of one-on-one practice, so I feel like judgment started to come a little bit easier because the child, from being one-on-one, played with other students and stuff like that, so I was able to make judgments on who they wanted to play with, at what time, and when they wanted to because of the activity. So developing the intentional practices is one that I've had struggle with because, again, I've only worked one-on-one. Well, in a preschool setting. In a preschool setting, I've only worked one-on-one. Going on to number 5, how has developing this plan contributed to the competencies of the NAEYC standards 2 and 4? So how has developing this plan? It's contributed to it because, so sorry for the tongue tie, because now I'm much more aware of what my weaknesses are. I am willing to just enter a classroom and see how it goes, work with others, and just literally take it kind of head on and just see what happens. However, now it's healthier for me to know what my weaknesses are, where I struggle, what happens much more often versus not at all. For example, in one of in our responsive practices that we did last week. So overall, it just helps me much better know what my weaknesses are and what they aren't. Okay, so on to number 6. What might you do differently as a result of developing this plan? What questions do you still have about planning cultural linguistic response practices? Okay, so from this, because of my previous observations at the junior college and some of the observations I've done now at Brandman, for example, I've learned not all the preschools are the same. So sometimes my questions just simply vary. For example, the observation I just did about 2-3 weeks ago for another class, so it's about a few weeks ago, my questions would completely differ because the area I was in did not have too many like dress up areas where culturally they were able to dress as another just in another cultural form, or even just dress up as something else. There was nothing like that. So culturally I wasn't too comfortable with asking yet what they wanted to do differently or anything like that. So for developing the plan, I feel like when I went into this field, it's easier to develop a plan when you know what your area is, where you're going to be involved with other staff members, with other children. So there's a limit. It's important to know where your area is going to be, what children you're going to be working with, before you just run into questions. It's healthier to know what area you're going to be in, so you know what you're working with. It's like if I were to just apply anywhere. Am I going to apply anywhere, or am I going to apply somewhere where I want to go head on, have all my questions ready, know that all of the areas that are given for children are healthy for them? There are cultural expectancies and plans that are being delivered to them. So I have had previous cultural questions, but I think now my perspective has changed on that due to observations and all. Thank you so much for listening. Hope you don't mind me looking down at my questions and all. Alrighty, thank you. Bye.